The gunshot echoed across Fairplay, Colorado, as Rebecca Zimmerman clutched her children close, knowing the life she'd built was about to collapse around her. The year was 1878, and the frontier town nestled in the South Park Basin had seen its share of violence, but nothing had prepared her for the men who now approached her small homestead with determination in their eyes and the law supposedly on their side. "Mama, who are they?" whispered 8-year-old Emma, her small fingers digging into Rebecca's worn cotton dress. Rebecca swallowed hard, forcing calm into her voice. "Just stay behind me, sweetheart." She nudged Emma back toward her younger brother, 6-year-old Thomas, who watched with wide eyes from the doorway of their modest cabin. The 3 riders approaching her property were led by Walter Preston, the bank manager who'd been circling like a vulture since her husband's death 6 months prior. Behind him rode the town deputy, and another man she didn't recognize, likely from the county office. Official-looking papers peeked from Preston's breast pocket as he dismounted, a smug expression crossing his weathered face. "Mrs. Zimmerman," Preston called, his voice carrying across the yard, "I believe you know why we're here." Rebecca stood taller, though fear coursed through her veins. "My husband's debt has 3 more months before it's due. We had an agreement." Preston shook his head, removing the papers from his pocket. "The terms have changed. The bank's called in the loan, effective immediately." His eyes darted to the children. "And as you have no means to support these young ones, the county's prepared to place them with families who can provide proper care." "You can't take my children." Rebecca's voice broke as she backed toward the cabin door. "Madam," the deputy stepped forward, "please don't make this more difficult than it needs to be." Rebecca's mind raced. Jacob had left her with mounting debts when pneumonia took him last winter. She'd done everything possible to keep their small ranch running, sold livestock, worked extra washing and mending for townspeople, even sold her wedding band. But the drought had been cruel this summer, and Preston had been looking for any excuse to claim their land, which sat atop the creek that fed his larger property downstream. "I need more time," she pleaded. "Just until harvest. The decision's been made." Preston nodded to the deputy. "Get the children." Rebecca pushed Emma and Thomas further behind her. "No, Mrs. Zimmerman, be reasonable," the deputy said, approaching the steps. "They'll be well cared for." "By whom?" she demanded. "Separated and sent to strangers. They're all I have left." The sound of approaching hoofbeats cut through their confrontation. All heads turned as a rider appeared from the direction of town, his horse pushing hard up the dirt road. The man pulled his mount to a stop in a cloud of dust, and Rebecca felt her breath catch. She recognized him instantly: Hank Jameson, a cowboy who occasionally did business with the local ranchers. Tall and broad-shouldered, with sun-weathered skin and eyes the color of a summer sky, he wasn't like the rough men who sometimes pass through town. He had a quiet way about him that commanded respect without demanding it. They'd exchanged few words in the past: a nod at the general store, a tip of his hat when passing on the street. "What's happening here?" Hank's deep voice carried across the yard as he dismounted in one fluid motion. Preston squared his shoulders. "This doesn't concern you, Jameson. This is bank business." Hank's eyes took in the scene: Rebecca standing protectively in front of her children, the men advancing toward the cabin. Understanding crossed his features. "I believe it does concern me," he said, stepping forward. "When 3 men ride out to intimidate a widow and take her children, it becomes everyone's business." "We have legal authority," Preston snapped, waving the papers. "The Zimmerman property is foreclosed, and the children are being placed in county care until suitable arrangements can be made." Rebecca watched as Hank's expression hardened. He moved deliberately, positioning himself between her family and the 3 men. "Over my body," he said, his voice quiet but carrying enough steel to make the deputy pause. Preston snorted. "You'd interfere with official county business for a woman you barely know." Hank didn't flinch. "I know enough. I know Jacob Zimmerman was given a year to repay his loans after the cattle disease took half his herd. I know that agreement was in writing, and I know he's been dead less than 6 months." He nodded toward the paper in Preston's hand. "And I know bankers' math sometimes gets creative when there's valuable water rights involved." The deputy shifted uncomfortably. "Mr. Preston assured me everything was in order. Did he now?" Hank reached slowly into his saddlebag and withdrew a folded piece of paper. "Strange, because I have here a copy of the original loan agreement, signed and witnessed. 3 more months remain before any action can be taken legally." Rebecca stared in surprise. How did this man have her husband's loan papers? Preston's face flushed with anger. "Where did you get that?" "That's confidential bank business. Jacob showed it to me before he died," Hank said evenly. "Asked me to keep an eye on things, knowing how you'd been trying to get this land." He handed the document to the deputy. "You might want to read what you're enforcing, Deputy Miller." The silence stretched as the deputy reviewed the paper, his expression growing increasingly troubled. "Mr. Preston, this doesn't match the documents you provided to the county office." Preston's face contorted. "It's been amended since then." "The bank has the right, not without notifying the borrower," Hank interrupted. "Not without following territorial law." The deputy handed the paper back to Hank and turned to Preston. "I can't enforce this today, not without reviewing the full documentation and bringing it before the judge." "This is outrageous," Preston sputtered. "What's outrageous," Hank said, stepping closer to the banker, "is using a woman's grief and desperation to steal her property and separate her from her children." His voice dropped lower. "And I'd think real carefully about coming back here with falsified documents, Preston. Judge Williams takes a dim view of fraud." The color drained from Preston's face. He snatched the papers from the deputy's hand and stormed toward his horse. "This isn't over," he warned, glaring at Rebecca before mounting up. As the 3 men rode away, Rebecca felt her knees weaken. She reached for the porch railing to steady herself. Hank turned to her, his expression softening. "Are you all right, Mrs. Zimmerman?" "Rebecca," she whispered, tears threatening. "Please call me Rebecca." She looked at him, bewilderment mixing with gratitude. "Why did you help us? How did you know?" Hank removed his hat, revealing thick chestnut hair. "Your husband and I served together briefly during the war. When he got sick last winter, he asked me to look in on you if anything happened to him." He glanced down. "I should have come sooner. Been watching Preston's movements and got word he was making his move today." Emma peered around her mother, studying the tall stranger. "Did you know my pa?" Hank knelt down to the child's level. "I did, little lady. He was a good man who loved you very much." Thomas stepped forward, braver now that the threat had passed. "Are they coming back for us?" "No," Hank said firmly. "Not if I can help it." He looked up at Rebecca. "But Preston won't give up easily. That creek access is too valuable." Rebecca pushed a strand of auburn hair from her face, feeling the full weight of her situation. "I don't know how to thank you, Mr. Jameson. You saved my children today." "Hank," he corrected with a gentle smile. "And no thanks needed." He glanced around the property, noting the untended fields and disrepair. "But if you'll allow me, I'd like to help get this place back on its feet before Preston finds another angle." Rebecca hesitated. 6 months of struggling alone had taught her to be wary of offered help, especially from men. Most wanted something in return. As if reading her thoughts, Hank added, "I promised your husband, Rebecca. Nothing more to it than that." She searched his face, finding nothing but sincerity in those blue eyes. With 2 hungry children and a failing farm, pride was a luxury she couldn't afford. "We could use the help," she admitted finally, "but I can't pay you much. Roof over my head and meals is all I need," he replied. Got nowhere pressing to be for a while. Emma tugged at her mother's skirt. "Can he stay? Mama, please." Rebecca looked at her children's hopeful faces, then back to the cowboy who had appeared like an answer to prayers she'd stopped believing would be heard. "We have a small room off the kitchen," she said. "It's not much, but it'll be fine," Hank assured her, putting his hat back on. "I'll get my things from town tomorrow. For now, maybe I'll take a look at that broken fence I noticed on the north side." As he walked back to his horse to retrieve his tools, Rebecca felt something she hadn't experienced in months' hope. She didn't know why this man had really come to their aid or how long he'd stay. But for the first time since becoming a widow, she didn't feel completely alone. What she didn't realize then was that Hank Jameson's arrival would change everything, not just for her struggling farm, but for her heart, which had been as dormant as her winter fields. The first week with Hank on the property transformed the homestead. He rose before dawn each day, tackling the most pressing repairs with quiet efficiency. Rebecca watched from the kitchen window as he mended fences, repaired the leaking roof, and cleared irrigation ditches that had become clogged during her months of struggling alone. By the third day, Thomas had become Hank's shadow, eagerly carrying tools and asking endless questions. Even Emma, usually shy around strangers, had warmed to the cowboy's gentle presence. "He knows everything, Mama," Thomas announced at dinner, his plate piled with stew. "He showed me how to mend rope and fix the chicken coop," Rebecca smiled, passing Hank another helping. "Seems you've made quite an impression." Hank ducked his head modestly. "Boy's a quick learner." "Will you teach me to ride like you?" Thomas asked eagerly. "If your ma says it's all right," Hank replied, glancing at Rebecca. She nodded. His father had started teaching him before. She didn't finish the sentence. "Then we'll continue his education," Hank said, smoothly filling the silence. "Every rancher needs to ride." After the children were tucked in bed, Rebecca often found Hank on the porch, sketching plans or staring at the stars. These quiet evenings became a time for conversation as she brought him coffee, and they discussed the farm's needs. "The south field should be planted with alfalfa," he suggested one night. "It'll improve the soil for next season and provide feed for livestock." "Livestock we don't have," Rebecca sighed. "Jacob had to sell most of our animals to cover medical expenses." Hank nodded thoughtfully. "The Hendersons over in South Park have calving season coming. They owe me for breaking horses last fall. I could ask for payment in heifers instead of cash." Rebecca stiffened. "I can't accept charity, Hank." "Not charity," he corrected. "Investment. This land has potential. With water rights and proper management, it could be profitable again." "For a woman alone?" she asked, unable to keep the bitterness from her voice. Hank turned to her, his expression serious. "You're not alone anymore, Rebecca." The simple statement hung in the air between them, laden with meaning neither was ready to acknowledge. As the days stretched into weeks, Rebecca found herself watching Hank when he wasn't looking, the way the muscles in his back moved as he chopped wood, the gentleness in his hands when he showed Emma how to gather eggs without frightening the hens, the smile that transformed his serious face whenever Thomas mastered a new skill. She caught herself wondering about his past, this quiet man who seemed content spending his days rebuilding someone else's life. He spoke little about himself, deflecting personal questions with easy humor or changing the subject back to farm matters. One evening, as summer heat gave way to cooler nights, Rebecca found the courage to ask directly, "You never talk about yourself, Hank. Where were you headed before you detoured to save us?" He was silent for so long she thought he might not answer. Finally, he set aside his coffee cup. "Nowhere particular," he said. "Been drifting since the war ended. Worked ranches from Texas to Wyoming." He paused. "After seeing what men can do to each other, I prefer the company of open country." "But you knew Jacob?" Hank nodded. 75th Infantry. "We weren't close, but you remember the men who show decency in hell." His eyes took on a distant look. "Your husband spoke often about his family, carried your picture and showed it to anyone who'd look." Rebecca felt tears threatening. "He never told me he'd asked you to check on us." Jacob was proud, probably hoped he'd never need to call in that favor. Hank's voice softened. "But he loved you and those children more than anything." She wiped away a tear. "Thank you for telling me that. It's the truth." He hesitated. "Rebecca, there's something you should know about Preston." Her back straightened. "What is it?" "I've been asking around town. That creek that runs through your property is more valuable than you might realize. There's been talk of a new mining operation starting up, and they need water rights." "And Preston wants to control it," she finished, understanding dawning. "He's likely getting a handsome commission for securing the rights." Hank leaned forward. "That's why he won't give up easily." Rebecca felt cold fear returning. "The 3-month extension won't matter if I can't make the payment." "That's why we need to get this place producing again," Hank said firmly. "I've been thinking about your late husband's woodworking skills. The shed still has his tools." "Yes," Rebecca said, surprised. "He made furniture during winter months. Beautiful pieces." "The new hotel in Fairplay needs furnishings," Hank said. "I spoke with the owner yesterday. He's willing to commission bedroom sets if the quality matches what Jacob made for the church." Hope fluttered in Rebecca's chest. "I couldn't possibly." "You can," Hank interrupted. "I've seen you mending the children's clothes with stitches finer than any tailor's. Your hands are skilled, Rebecca, and I can help with the heavy cutting." For the first time in months, Rebecca allowed herself to imagine a future beyond mere survival. "Do you really think we could earn enough?" "That, plus the calves I arranged with the Hendersons and what we can get for the crops if we work hard, yes. I believe we can meet the payment." His confidence was unwavering. That night, Rebecca lay awake long after the house fell silent, turning over everything in her mind. She couldn't deny the changes in the past 3 weeks, not just to the farm, but to herself. The constant fear that had been her companion since Jacob's death had receded, replaced by something equally powerful but infinitely more pleasant: possibility. And at the center of these new possibilities stood Hank Jameson, a man who'd stepped between her family and disaster without hesitation. A man whose quiet strength made her feel secure for the first time in too long. It was dangerous territory for a widow with 2 small children, she knew. But as she drifted toward sleep, Rebecca admitted to herself that her heart was awakening from its long winter whether she was ready or not. Morning arrived with unexpected visitors. Rebecca was kneading bread dough when the sound of horses approaching drew her attention. Through the window, she saw 3 riders coming up the path, but this time, it wasn't Preston and his men. Sheriff Davis led the group, flanked by Judge Williams and a smartly dressed woman Rebecca recognized as Harriet Simmons, who ran the town's hotel. Wiping flour from her hands, Rebecca stepped onto the porch as Hank emerged from the barn. She noticed how he positioned himself near her, not quite between her and the visitors, but close enough to step in if needed. "Morning, Mrs. Zimmerman," the sheriff called, tipping his hat. "Hope we're not intruding too early." "Not at all," Rebecca replied, though her stomach tightened. Official visits rarely brought good news. Judge Williams, a dignified man in his 60s with a silver beard, dismounted with some effort. "Mrs. Zimmerman, we've come about a matter concerning Walter Preston and the Fairplay Bank." Hank stepped closer to Rebecca. Has something happened? The judge's sharp eyes assessed Hank before returning to Rebecca. Indeed it has. Mr. Preston submitted foreclosure papers on your property last week, claiming the loan was in default. Rebecca's heart sank. But we have 3 more months, precisely, the judge interrupted, holding up a hand. When I reviewed the documentation, I found significant discrepancies. Upon further investigation, it appears Mr. Preston has been engaging in similar practices with other properties along this watershed. He's been falsifying loan documents, Sheriff Davis added bluntly. Rebecca exchanged a stunned look with Hank. So my property is secure for the original terms, Judge Williams confirmed. You have until October to make good on the debt. Furthermore, given Preston's misconduct, I've ordered a review of all interest calculated on your loan. Relief flooded through Rebecca so intensely she had to grip the porch railing. What about Preston, facing charges? The sheriff said. He's been removed from the bank pending investigation. Several other property owners have come forward with similar complaints. Harriet Simmons stepped forward, her practical dress and no-nonsense demeanor a contrast to her business success. That's partly why I'm here, Mrs. Zimmerman. Your cowboy friend approached me about commissioning furniture. Her shrewd eyes traveled between Rebecca and Hank. I'd like to see examples of work similar to what I might expect. Of course, Rebecca managed, still processing everything. My husband's workshop is in the shed. There are finished pieces there. As they moved toward the workshop, Hank gently touched Rebecca's elbow. You all right? She nodded, still dazed. Did you know about this? About Preston's investigation? I suspected, Hank admitted. After our confrontation, I spoke with Judge Williams, showed him your husband's original loan papers, suggested he might want to look closer at Preston's dealings. You did this for us, Rebecca whispered. Hank's eyes held hers. I did it because it was right. In the workshop, Harriet examined Jacob's craftsmanship with professional interest, running her fingers over the smooth joints of a rocking chair and the carved details of a small chest. Excellent work, she declared. I need 10 bedroom sets for the hotel expansion. Beds, nightstands, dressers. Can you produce them? Rebecca hesitated, overwhelmed by the scale of the request. We can, Hank said confidently. Given adequate time and materials. Harriet nodded. I'll provide advance payment for lumber. Half now, half upon delivery. Will 3 months suffice? Yes, Rebecca said, finding her voice. With this commission alone, she could make the loan payment. After the visitors departed with promises of contracts and lumber deliveries, Rebecca stood in the yard, watching their dust trails disappear. Did that really just happen? She asked softly. Hank smiled, the corners of his eyes crinkling. Appears so. She turned to him, emotion making her voice unsteady. You saved us again. No, he countered. You saved yourself. I just helped clear the path. Without thinking, Rebecca reached for his hand, squeezing it tightly. Thank you. Their eyes met, and something changed in that moment, an acknowledgement of feelings neither had been ready to name. But before either could speak, Emma's voice broke the spell. Mama, look what Thomas did to my doll. Rebecca reluctantly released Hank's hand as her daughter came running, a headless doll clutched in her arms and an apologetic Thomas trailing behind. Duty calls, she said with a small smile. Hank nodded, his eyes still holding hers. I'll start planning the lumber requirements. As he walked toward the workshop, Rebecca felt certain that something fundamental had shifted between them, something that couldn't be undone or ignored for much longer. The next weeks passed in a blur of activity. Lumber arrived from Denver, filling the workshop with the sharp scent of pine and oak. Rebecca discovered that her sewing skills translated well to the finer aspects of furniture making, while Hank handled the heavy cutting and construction. Together, they fell into a rhythm, working side by side in comfortable silence or easy conversation. The children thrived under the new routine. Thomas spent mornings learning ranching skills from Hank and afternoons practicing his letters with Rebecca. Emma helped with cooking and developed a talent for sanding wood to a silky finish, her small hands perfect for detail work. Rumors of Preston's misdeeds spread through the county, and several of his victims began stopping by the Zimmerman property to thank Hank for exposing the banker's schemes. Rebecca noticed how uncomfortable these visits made him. "You don't like being called a hero," she observed one evening as they sat on the porch after the children were asleep. Hank shifted in his chair. "I'm no hero, just did what needed doing." "Why do you do that?" she asked gently. "Do what?" "Diminish your actions. You've helped so many people by standing up to Preston, yet you seem almost embarrassed by their gratitude." He was quiet for so long Rebecca thought he might not answer. Finally, he sighed. "War makes heroes of men who should never be celebrated. I watched boys die believing their sacrifice made them heroes, when really they were just victims of other men's ambitions." His voice dropped lower. "I survived when better men didn't. There's no heroism in that." Rebecca studied his profile in the fading light. "Is that why you've been drifting all these years? Some kind of penance?" Hank looked at her then, surprise evident in his expression. "You see too much, Rebecca Zimmerman." "I see you," she said simply. Something vulnerable flickered in his eyes before he looked away toward the darkening fields. "The war left me hollow, couldn't settle anywhere, couldn't find purpose." He paused. "Until now." The admission hung between them, heavy with implication. "And now?" she prompted softly. Hank turned back to her, his expression open in a way she'd never seen before. "Now I find myself wanting things I haven't wanted in a very long time." Rebecca's heart quickened. "What things?" "Roots," he said. "A place that feels like home." His eyes held hers. "People who matter." She reached across the space between their chairs, offering her hand. He took it, his calloused fingers entwining with hers. "We matter to you," she whispered. "More than I can say," he admitted, his voice rough with emotion. They sat like that for a long time, holding hands in the gathering darkness, neither needing more words to understand what was happening between them. The moment was broken by a distant rumble of thunder. Hank reluctantly released her hand and stood. "Storm's coming. I should check the barn doors." Rebecca nodded, suddenly shy. "I'll see you at breakfast." As he walked toward the barn, she remained on the porch, touching her fingers where his had been, aware that she was falling in love with Hank Jameson and terrified of what that might mean for her carefully rebuilding life. The summer storm that night proved fierce, dumping inches of rain that swelled the creek to its banks. By morning, fields were sodden but undamaged thanks to the irrigation work Hank had completed. The roads to town, however, were temporarily impassable, keeping them homebound for several days. These rain-soaked days created an unexpected intimacy, as the four of them gathered around the kitchen table for meals, games, and lessons. Rebecca taught Emma to make bread, while Hank showed Thomas how to whittle small animals from scraps of wood. In the evenings, Hank revealed a talent for storytelling, spinning tales of cattle drives and frontier adventures that had both children begging for just one more. Rebecca found herself storing away these domestic scenes in her memory, the way Hank's eyes crinkled when he laughed, how gently he corrected Thomas's grip on a whittling knife, the patient tone he used when answering Emma's endless questions. When the roads finally dried enough for travel, Hank rode to town for supplies and returned with a letter from Harriet Simmons requesting the first furniture delivery earlier than planned. "The hotel's grand opening has been moved up," he explained as they discussed the situation over dinner. She needs at least 3-bedroom sets by month's end. Rebecca frowned. That's barely 2 weeks. We've only completed 2 sets. I could work longer hours, Hank suggested, and Thomas has become quite skilled at sanding if he's willing to help more. Thomas straightened in his chair. I can do it. Rebecca smiled at her son's eagerness. Very well, but school lessons still come first. After the children were asleep, Rebecca and Hank returned to the workshop to assess their progress. The lamplight cast warm shadows over the partially completed furniture bed frames in various stages, nightstands taking shape, dresser drawers waiting for handles. It's beautiful work, Rebecca said, running her fingers over a headboard carved with a mountain scene. Jacob would be proud. He'd be proud of you, Hank corrected. Taking on his craft saving the farm, she turned to him. We're saving it together. Their eyes met, and Rebecca felt the air between them change, becoming charged with unspoken feelings. Hank took a step closer, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him. Rebecca, he said softly, I need to say something. Her heart hammered in her chest. Yes, I came here to fulfill a promise to a dying man, to protect his family until they were safe. His voice was low, intense. But somewhere along the way, you and the children became more than an obligation. Rebecca swallowed, unable to look away from his eyes. What are we to you, Hank? Everything, he whispered. His hand rose slowly to her face, giving her time to step away if she wished. When she didn't move, his fingers gently brushed her cheek. I never expected to feel this way again. Never thought I'd find a home after all the years of wandering. And have you? She asked, her voice barely audible. Found a home. I believe I have, he answered. If you'll have me. Rebecca closed her eyes briefly, leaning into his touch. When she opened them, she saw everything she needed in his gaze: honesty, respect, and something deeper that made her breath catch. I've been afraid, she admitted. Afraid of needing someone again. Afraid of what happens if you leave. I'm not leaving, Hank promised. Not unless you ask me to. She shook her head slightly. I don't want you to go. The confession hung between them for a heartbeat before Hank lowered his head slowly, giving her every chance to pull away. Instead, Rebecca raised her face to his, and their lips met in a kiss so gentle it brought tears to her eyes. His arms encircled her waist as hers went around his neck, the kiss deepening with shared longing. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing unevenly. I've wanted to do that since the first night on the porch, Hank confessed, his forehead resting against hers. Rebecca smiled, feeling lighter than she had in years. I think I've wanted you to. They might have stayed there longer, discovering this new territory between them, but a crash from the house sent them hurrying back. They found Thomas standing sheepishly by a toppled chair in the kitchen. I was getting water, he explained, looking guiltily at the cup in his hand. Rebecca exchanged an amused glance with Hank. Back to bed, young man. We have an early start tomorrow. As she tucked Thomas back in, he looked up at her with serious eyes. Mama, is Hank going to stay forever? The question caught her off guard. Would you like that? Thomas nodded emphatically. He teaches me things, and he makes you smile again. Rebecca smoothed his hair back from his forehead. He makes me smile too. So he's staying, Thomas persisted. We'll see, she answered, not ready to make promises she couldn't keep. Now sleep. When she returned to the kitchen, Hank was waiting, his expression tentative. Is he all right? He asked. He's fine, just curious about us. And what did you tell him? Rebecca approached slowly. That we'll see. She took his hands in hers. I need time, Hank. This is all happening so fast. He nodded, understanding in his eyes. We have time. I'm not going anywhere. They shared one more brief kiss before saying goodnight, both aware that everything had changed and that the real challenges were only beginning. The next 2 weeks passed in a flurry of activity. as they worked to complete Harriet's first order. Their days settled into a new pattern, working together during daylight hours, stealing moments of closeness when the children weren't watching, and speaking softly on the porch after nightfall. Emma was the first to notice the change between them. "Are you sweet on Hank, Mama?" she asked innocently while helping Rebecca prepare vegetables for stew. Rebecca nearly cut her finger in surprise. "What makes you ask that?" Emma shrugged. "You look at him the way Mrs. Henderson looks at Mr. Henderson, and you smile different now." "Different how?" "With your eyes, too," Emma said simply. "I like it. You were sad for so long." Rebecca set down her knife, turning to her daughter. "How would you feel if Hank became more than just our friend?" Emma considered this seriously. "Would he be like a pa to us?" "Perhaps," Rebecca said carefully. "But no one could replace your father." "I know," Emma replied. "But Hank is nice, and he fixed my doll after Thomas broke it, and he doesn't shout even when things go wrong." She looked up at her mother. "And he loves you, I can tell." Rebecca felt heat rise to her cheeks. "Can you now?" Emma nodded with the certainty of an 8-year-old. "It's obvious, Mama." That evening, as they loaded the completed furniture onto the wagon for delivery to town, Rebecca shared the conversation with Hank. He chuckled softly. "Sharp girl, you're Emma." "Too sharp sometimes," Rebecca agreed, helping him secure a dresser. "She seems to approve, by the way. And Thomas already thinks of you as family." She hesitated. "Are we moving too quickly, Hank? It's barely been 2 months since you arrived." He straightened, wiping his hands on his trousers. "Some things don't need time, Rebecca. Sometimes you just know." He stepped closer. "But we can slow down if you need to." She shook her head. "That's just it. I don't want to slow down, and that terrifies me." His smile was gentle. "Being afraid doesn't mean you're making a mistake. It means you're taking a risk that matters." The delivery to Fairplay's Grand Hotel the next day proved a triumph. Harriet Simmons inspected each piece with critical eyes before declaring herself more than satisfied. "These exceed my expectations," she announced, running her hand along a dresser's smooth surface. "I'll need the remaining sets as soon as you can produce them." She counted out payment enough to cover the next loan installment with money to spare. As she handed over the cash, Harriet gave Rebecca an appraising look. "You've accomplished quite a transformation, Mrs. Zimmerman. Both of your property and yourself." Rebecca blinked in surprise. "Myself?" Harriet's eyes flicked briefly to Hank, who was discussing timber with the hotel carpenter. "You carry yourself differently now. There's confidence there." A rare smile softened the businesswoman's features. "It suits you." The ride back to the farm was filled with plans, materials to order, improvements for the next furniture pieces, calculations of how much they could save toward paying off the loan entirely. "At this rate," Hank said as they crossed the creek that bordered the property, "you'll own the land free and clear by next spring." Rebecca couldn't help noticing his choice of words. "You mean we will?" He glanced at her, uncertainty crossing his features. "Rebecca, I wouldn't presume, but I would," she interrupted. "Presume, that is." She took a deep breath. "Unless I've misunderstood what's happening between us." Hank pulled the wagon to a stop, turning fully toward her. "You haven't misunderstood anything. I love you, Rebecca. I love your children. I want to build a life here if you'll have me." The simple declaration, spoken plainly in the fading afternoon light, filled Rebecca with certainty. "I love you too," she said, the words both frightening and freeing. "I think I have since you stood between my children and those men, ready to face whatever came." His smile was radiant as he leaned across the wagon seat to kiss her, a kiss full of promise and future. They were so absorbed in each other that neither noticed the rider approaching until he was nearly upon them. "Well, isn't this touching?" came a voice dripping with malice. They broke apart to find Walter Preston sitting astride his horse just yards away, a rifle balanced casually across his saddle. Hank shifted subtly, placing himself between Rebecca and the former banker. "Preston, heard you were facing charges in Denver." Preston's face contorted with rage. "Released on bond, temporary setback thanks to your interference." His bloodshot eyes suggested he'd been drinking. "You ruined everything I've worked for." "You did that yourself," Hank replied evenly. "Falsifying documents, defrauding customers. It was business," Preston spat. "This backward town never understood real business." His gaze shifted to Rebecca. "And you, a pathetic widow who couldn't manage without a man to rescue her." Rebecca felt anger replace her initial fear. "I managed just fine. You were the one who tried to steal my land through deception." "That land should have been mine," Preston growled. "The water rights alone are worth 10 times what your husband paid." "Which explains your eagerness to foreclose," Hank said. "The mining company paid you well." Preston's surprise confirmed Hank's suspicion. "How did you small towns have big ears?" Hank cut in. "Your deals with Consolidated Mining weren't as secret as you thought." Preston's expression darkened further. "Doesn't matter now. I'm finished in fair play regardless." He raised the rifle slightly. "But I'll be damned if I leave without settling accounts." Rebecca felt cold dread wash over her as the rifle barrel lifted toward Hank. "Think carefully, Preston," Hank warned, his voice calm despite the threat. "Murder will earn you the noose, not just prison time." "They'll have to catch me first," Preston sneered. "I'm headed for California tomorrow, but first I'll have the satisfaction of watching you die on the land you kept from me." Time seemed to slow as Preston's finger tightened on the trigger. Without conscious thought, Rebecca shoved Hank hard, throwing him sideways off the wagon seat just as the rifle cracked. Pain exploded in her upper arm as the bullet grazed her instead of finding its intended target. Chaos erupted. Hank rolled to his feet with surprising speed, lunging for Preston before he could chamber another round. The two men collided as Preston's horse reared in panic, sending them both crashing to the ground. Rebecca clutched her bleeding arm, watching in horror as the men grappled in the dirt. Preston was larger but slower. Hank moved with the precision of someone familiar with violence, despite his gentle nature. A series of quick blows left Preston dazed, and Hank wrenched the rifle from his grasp. "Don't move," Hank commanded, training the weapon on the banker. Preston spat blood from a split lip. "You won't shoot me. You don't have the spine for it." "Try me," Hank said, his voice deadly quiet. "You just shot the woman I love. There's very little restraining me right now." Something in his tone made Preston go still. "Rebecca," Hank called, not taking his eyes off Preston. "How badly are you hurt?" "It's just a graze," she answered, though the wound burned fiercely. "I'm all right." The sound of approaching riders drew their attention. Sheriff Davis appeared with 2 deputies, rifles ready. "We heard gunfire," Davis called. "What in blazes?" he broke off, taking in the scene. "Preston, you're supposed to be in Denver awaiting trial." "Add attempted murder to his charges," Hank said grimly. "He just tried to kill me and wounded Mrs. Zimmerman instead." As the deputies took Preston into custody, the full reality of what had happened washed over Rebecca. She began trembling uncontrollably, delayed shock setting in. Hank was at her side instantly, helping her down from the wagon. "Let me see," he said gently, examining her arm. The bullet had torn through her sleeve and left a bloody furrow across her upper arm, but hadn't penetrated deeply. "You could have been killed," she whispered, the words barely audible. "You saved my life," Hank replied, his voice rough with emotion. "Rebecca, what you did—" "I couldn't lose you," she interrupted. "Not now, not after everything." He gathered her carefully against his chest, mindful of her injury. "You won't lose me, not ever if I have any say in it." Sheriff Davis approached after Preston was securely bound. "Mrs. Zimmerman, we need to get that wound tended, and I'll need statements from both of you." "The children," Rebecca said suddenly. "They're at the Wilsons in town. They'll be worried if we don't return soon." "I'll send Deputy Clark to inform them you've been delayed," Davis assured her. "Let's get you to Doc Miller's first." As they rode toward town, Rebecca leaned against Hank's solid presence, her mind racing through the events of the day, from the triumph of their furniture delivery to the terror of facing Preston's revenge. Through it all, one certainty remained. Her feelings for Hank Jameson had been tested by fire and emerged stronger than ever. The news of Preston's attack and arrest spread through Fairplay like wildfire. By the time Doc Miller finished bandaging Rebecca's arm, a crowd had gathered outside his office, eager for details. Among them were Emma and Thomas, who broke away from Mrs. Wilson to rush to their mother as she emerged. "Mama, you're hurt," Emma cried, her eyes wide with concern. Rebecca knelt despite the pain in her arm. "It's just a scratch, sweetheart. I'm perfectly fine." Thomas stared up at Hank with newfound awe. "Did you fight the bad man, Hank? Mrs. Wilson said someone tried to shoot you." Hank ruffled the boy's hair. "Your mother's the real hero today. She saved me from getting hurt." Thomas's eyes grew even wider. "Really, really," Hank confirmed. "Your ma's the bravest person I know." That evening, after the sheriff had taken their statements and promised Preston would face serious charges, they returned to the farm. The children, exhausted by excitement and worry, fell asleep quickly, leaving Rebecca and Hank alone in the kitchen. "You should rest," he said, noting her pallor. "That arm needs healing." Rebecca shook her head. "I'm not ready for sleep yet. Too much happened today." Hank nodded, understanding. He poured them both coffee, then took her good hand in his. "Preston can't hurt us anymore. He'll be behind bars for years." "I know," she said, "but that's not what's keeping me awake." "What is?" Rebecca met his gaze steadily. "Today made everything clear to me, Hank. Life is too uncertain, too precious to waste being afraid." She squeezed his hand. "I don't want to wait anymore." "Wait for what?" he asked, though his eyes suggested he already knew. "For us," she said simply. "For everything we could be together." Hank's expression softened. "Rebecca Zimmerman, are you proposing to me?" A laugh bubbled up unexpectedly. "I believe I am." His smile was blinding. "Well then, I accept, on one condition." "Which is?" "That you let me do this properly." He released her hand and dropped to one knee beside her chair. From his pocket, he withdrew a simple gold band that gleamed in the lamplight. "I bought this in town last week. Been carrying it around, waiting for the right moment." Rebecca gasped softly. "Hank!" "Rebecca Zimmerman, I came here to fulfill a promise and found a purpose instead. You and your children have become my heart, my home." His voice was steady, his eyes never leaving hers. "Would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" Tears spilled down Rebecca's cheeks as she nodded. "Yes, with all my heart, yes." He slipped the ring onto her finger, then rose to kiss her tenderly. When they parted, both were smiling through tears. "How soon can we marry?" she asked. "As soon as you like. Tomorrow, if you want." His thumb brushed away a tear from her cheek. "Though people might talk if we rush too much." Rebecca laughed. "People already talk. 2 children just outside the door are waiting to hear every word." On cue, muffled giggles came from the hallway. Hank raised his eyebrows, then called, "You might as well come in now." Emma and Thomas appeared in the doorway, not looking remotely apologetic for eavesdropping. "Are you going to be our pa now?" Thomas asked immediately. Hank looked to Rebecca before answering. She nodded encouragement. "I'd be honored to be your pa," he said, "if you'll have me." Emma approached solemnly. Our real Pa is in heaven." "Yes, he is," Hank agreed. "And he loved you very much. I would never try to replace him in your hearts." Emma studied him for a long moment before breaking into a smile. "But we can love you too." "I hope so," Hank said, his voice roughening with emotion. "Because I already love you both." Thomas rushed forward, throwing his arms around Hank's waist. After a moment, Emma joined the embrace. Rebecca watched, her heart so full it ached as the man she loved gathered her children close. "So when's the wedding?" Emma asked practically. "Can I wear a new dress?" Rebecca laughed. "Yes to the new dress." As for when, she looked to Hank. "How about the first day of autumn?" he suggested. "It gives us time to finish Harriet's furniture order and make proper preparations." Rebecca nodded. "Perfect." That night, as Rebecca lay in bed reviewing the day's incredible journey from danger to joy, she realized how completely her life had transformed since the day Hank Jameson rode up to her farm and placed himself between her family and harm. "Over my body," he had said. And in that moment of protection, he had begun to heal something broken in her, something she hadn't realized could be mended. The next 6 weeks passed in a blur of activity and anticipation. Word of their engagement spread quickly through Fairplay, bringing congratulations and offers of help with wedding preparations. Harriet Simmons surprised them by insisting on hosting the reception at her new hotel, good publicity, she claimed, though Rebecca suspected genuine goodwill beneath the businesswoman's practical exterior. The furniture orders continued to come in after the hotel's successful opening, providing steady income. With Hank's help, Rebecca expanded Jacob's workshop and hired 2 assistants from town to meet demand. By the time September arrived, they had paid the next loan installment and set aside enough to make a substantial payment on the principal. Preston's trial was swift and decisive. With multiple charges of fraud, attempted murder, and conspiracy with the mining company to illegally obtain water rights, he was sentenced to 15 years in territorial prison. The news brought final closure to the ordeal, allowing Rebecca to focus fully on her future with Hank. The children thrived with the certainty of stability. Thomas shadowed Hank constantly, soaking up ranching knowledge and woodworking skills with equal enthusiasm. Emma blossomed under Rebecca's gentle guidance, discovering talents for cooking and design that complemented her mother's furniture-making abilities. As wedding preparations intensified, Rebecca found moments of quiet wonder at how completely her life had transformed. One evening, as she and Emma worked on the simple white dress she would wear for the ceremony, she shared this thought. "Sometimes I can hardly believe how much has changed in half a year," she mused, threading a needle with pale blue ribbon to trim the collar. Emma looked up from her careful stitching. "Are you happy, Mama?" Rebecca smiled. "Happier than I ever imagined possible after your father died." "He would like Hank," Emma said with certainty. "Thomas says Pa sent him to us." Rebecca paused, considering the idea. "Your brother might be right." On the morning of their wedding day, September 22, 1878, Rebecca woke to brilliant autumn sunshine streaming through her bedroom window. The aspens on the surrounding hillsides had turned golden, creating a spectacular backdrop for the ceremony they would hold in the farm's front yard. Emma burst in shortly after dawn, too excited to sleep any longer. "It's today, Mama. You're getting married today." Rebecca laughed, pulling her daughter onto the bed beside her. "Yes, we are." "Hank's already up," Emma reported. "He and Thomas are decorating the arch with flowers and branches. And people from town are starting to arrive with food and chairs." The community's embrace of their union touched Rebecca deeply. Neighbors and townspeople had rallied around the preparations, turning what might have been a simple ceremony into a proper celebration. By mid-morning, The yard had transformed. Rows of chairs faced an arch woven with aspen branches and late-blooming wildflowers. Tables laden with food stretched along one side, while musicians from town tuned instruments under a nearby tree. Rebecca remained sequestered in her bedroom as tradition demanded, though she peeked occasionally from the window at the growing gathering. Her heart fluttered with nervous excitement when she spotted Hank in his best clothes, a new dark suit that emphasized his broad shoulders and contrasted with his sun-lightened hair. A knock at the door preceded Harriet Simmons's entrance, carrying a small wooden box. "Almost time," Harriet announced briskly. "Are you ready?" Rebecca nodded. "More than ready." Harriet's usual businesslike demeanor softened as she took in Rebecca's appearance, the simple white dress with blue ribbons, hair arranged in soft waves around her face, cheeks flushed with anticipation. "You look lovely," Harriet said with surprising gentleness. "Jameson's a fortunate man." "I'm the fortunate one," Rebecca replied. Harriet opened the box she carried. "I brought something for you. Old tradition says a bride needs something borrowed." She removed a delicate pearl necklace. "These were my mother's. I'd be honored if you'd wear them today." Touched by the unexpected gesture from the usually reserved woman, Rebecca turned so Harriet could fasten the pearls around her neck. "Thank you, Harriet, for everything." Harriet waved away her gratitude. "You've earned your happiness, Rebecca. Both of you have." A second knock announced Emma, resplendent in a new blue dress that matched the ribbons on Rebecca's gown. "It's time, Mama. Everyone's waiting." Rebecca took a deep breath. "Then we shouldn't keep them waiting any longer." Descending the porch steps to the music of violin and guitar, Rebecca felt a profound sense of rightness wash over her. The gathered townspeople rose as she appeared, but she had eyes only for Hank, waiting beneath the flower-decked arch with Thomas proudly at his side. Hank's expression as she approached was everything she could have hoped for: wonder, joy, and love so clear it brought tears to her eyes. Judge Williams, who had agreed to perform the ceremony, smiled broadly as Rebecca reached the arch and took Hank's outstretched hands. "Friends and neighbors," the judge began, "we gather today to witness the union of two people whose path to each other was neither straight nor easy, but all the more meaningful for the journey." Rebecca barely heard the traditional words that followed, lost in Hank's steady gaze. When the time came for vows, his voice rang clear and true. "Rebecca, I came to your door a drifter without purpose. You gave me roots, a home, and a family I never dreamed I'd have." His hands tightened gently around hers. "I vow to protect and cherish you and your children for all my days. To stand between you and any harm, to build and grow alongside you, to love you through whatever challenges come our way." When her turn came, Rebecca's voice trembled slightly but gained strength with each word. "Hank, you appeared when we needed you most, but you stayed for reasons that had nothing to do with obligation and everything to do with love." She squeezed his hands. "I vow to walk beside you as your partner, to create a home filled with warmth and joy, to face life's storms together, and to love you completely for all the days we're granted." Emma stepped forward with the ring's simple gold bands they'd chosen together. As they exchanged these final symbols of commitment, Rebecca felt the last shadows of her grief giving way to the bright promise of their shared future. "By the authority vested in me," Judge Williams concluded, "I now pronounce you husband and wife." His eyes twinkled. "You may kiss your bride, Mr. Jameson." Hank's hands framed her face with infinite tenderness as he lowered his lips to hers. The assembled crowd erupted in cheers, but Rebecca heard nothing beyond the beating of her own heart, and Hank's whispered, "I love you, Mrs. Jameson." The celebration that followed lasted well into the evening. There was music and dancing, feasting and laughter. Rebecca found herself passed from one congratulatory embrace to another, her cheeks aching from smiling as neighbors and friends offered good wishes. Through it all, Hank remained close, his hand often finding hers as if he couldn't bear to be separated even briefly. When they finally had a moment alone, slipping away to catch their breath near the creek that had once been the source of so much trouble, he pulled her gently into his arms. "Happy?" he asked, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "Completely," she answered, leaning into his embrace, "though I still can hardly believe how we got here." Hank smiled, the moonlight silvering his features. "I knew that day I rode up and found Preston threatening you. When I said over my body, I meant it with everything in me." "I know you did," she said softly. "You've proven it many times since. And I'll keep proving it," he promised. "Every day, Rebecca, you and the children are my life now." She reached up to trace the beloved contours of his face. "And you are ours." As twilight deepened into night and the celebration continued in the lantern-lit yard, Rebecca and Hank stood together by the creek that marked the boundary of their land, no longer her land or his protection, but their shared future. The water that had nearly cost Rebecca everything now reflected their joined silhouettes in its moonlit surface, two figures who had found each other against all odds in the wild frontier of Colorado. 5 years later, September 1883, the morning sun streamed through the windows of the expanded farmhouse as Rebecca put the finishing touches on a birthday cake. From outside came the sound of children's laughter and Hank's deep voice directing some game or project. Emma, now 13 and growing into a thoughtful young woman, entered the kitchen with armfuls of late summer flowers. "These are for the table, Mama. Do you think Samuel will notice them?" Rebecca smiled at her daughter's careful attention to detail. "I'm sure he will." At 3 years old, her youngest son noticed everything, especially when it involved his birthday. "Pa's helping Thomas and Sarah build some kind of surprise out in the workshop," Emma reported, arranging the flowers in a vase. "They wouldn't let me see." "Well, we'll all find out soon enough," Rebecca replied, adding a final decoration to the cake. The past 5 years had brought more joy than Rebecca could have imagined that fateful day when Hank stood between her family and disaster. Their furniture business had flourished, allowing them to expand the workshop into a proper small factory that employed 6 craftsmen from town. The original loan was long paid off, and they had added adjacent land to their holdings. Thomas, now 11, showed every sign of inheriting his stepfather's ranching skills along with his mother's eye for woodworking design. Sarah, their first child together, had arrived a year after their marriage, a solemn 4-year-old with Hank's blue eyes and Rebecca's auburn hair. Samuel, whose birthday they celebrated today, had completed their family with his curious nature and infectious laugh. The screen door banged open, and Samuel himself came running in, his chubby legs moving at full speed. "Mama, cake time," Rebecca laughed, scooping him up. "Not yet, birthday boy." "After dinner." "But I'm 3, he protested, holding up 3 fingers importantly. "Big boys eat cake first. Even big boys follow their mother's rules," came Hank's voice as he entered behind his son. 5 years of hard work and happiness had added a few lines around his eyes, but had also settled a permanent contentment in his expression that hadn't been there when they'd first met. He crossed to Rebecca, kissing her lightly. "The surprise is ready. Thomas and Sarah are putting the finishing touches on it now." "Will I like it?" Samuel asked, bouncing in Rebecca's arms. "I believe you will," Hank assured him, ruffling the boy's dark hair. "But first, I think Uncle Robert and Aunt Harriet have arrived." Through the window, Rebecca saw the Simmons carriage approaching. Harriet and Robert's courtship and marriage had been one of the unexpected outcomes of Rebecca and Hank's wedding. The businesswoman had found her match in the quiet shopkeeper, proving that love could find even the most unlikely candidates when the time was right. The birthday celebration brought together the extended family they'd created not just through blood, but through the bonds of friendship and community. Judge Williams, now retired but still sharp as ever at 70, told stories that had the children wide-eyed. Sheriff Davis and his wife brought gifts and news from town. The Hendersons arrived with a hand-carved wooden horse for Samuel, having become close friends after Hank helped deliver their youngest during a blizzard 2 winters ago. As the afternoon progressed, Rebecca found a quiet moment to stand on the porch, watching her family and friends celebrate together. Hank joined her, slipping an arm around her waist. "Penny for your thoughts, Mrs. Jameson." She leaned against his solid presence. "I was just thinking about how far we've come, how different life might have been if you hadn't ridden up that day." Hank's arm tightened around her. "I don't like to think about that possibility." "Nor do I," she admitted, "but it makes me grateful every day that you did." He turned her gently to face him. "You know, I've never told you where I was headed that day." Rebecca looked up in surprise. "No, you haven't. Nowhere," he said simply. "I was just drifting again, having finished a job up north, no destination in mind." His eyes held hers. "Until I heard in town about Preston's plans for a widow and her children." "So you came specifically to help us, not just passing by," Hank nodded. "Jacob had asked me to watch out for you, yes, but I hadn't planned to intervene directly until I heard what Preston intended." His expression softened. "Best detour I ever made." Rebecca reached up to touch his face, still moved by this man's capacity for caring after all these years. "For all of us." Their moment was interrupted by Thomas calling from the yard, "Pa, Ma, it's time for Samuel's surprise." They joined the gathered family and friends as Thomas and Sarah proudly unveiled their creation, a miniature rocking horse, sized perfectly for a 3-year-old, with Samuel's name carved into its base. "We helped Pa make it," Thomas announced, chest puffed with pride. "I did the sanding and Sarah painted it." Samuel's eyes grew round with wonder. "For me, my very own, your very own," Hank confirmed, lifting the boy onto the small horse. As Samuel rocked back and forth with delight, Rebecca found herself surrounded by her children, the 2 she'd nearly lost that fateful day, and the 2 who had come after. She watched as Hank demonstrated the proper rocking technique to his youngest son, his patience and love evident in every gesture. Later, as twilight settled over the land and guests began departing, Rebecca and Hank stood together on the porch, watching the last golden light fade from the aspen leaves. "You ever think about how close we came to losing all this?" she asked softly. Hank's arm encircled her shoulders. "Sometimes, but then I remember what I told Preston that day." He turned to her, his eyes reflecting the day's happiness. "Over my body." "And you meant it," she said, "every word." He brushed a tender kiss against her forehead. "Then and now and always, Rebecca. Over my body will anything ever harm you or our children." As the first stars appeared above their home, the home they had built together from desperation and courage and love, Rebecca knew with absolute certainty that the promise would hold. The cowboy who had stood between her family and disaster had become the foundation upon which they had built a life more blessed than she had ever dared to imagine. And as their children called them inside for one last piece of birthday cake, Rebecca and Hank Jameson walked hand in hand toward the light and laughter, secure in the love that had begun with a stand against injustice and grown into a legacy that would endure long after they were gone.